Hi there once again. Let us look at question 4 of the sample paper, the Business Analysis Practice sample paper. So let's first read the question to see what we can identify here. Or let's first get an overview and then identify some things once we've got an overview of it. So it says, you have been asked by Pfizer for advice. She has produced a set of business activity models, or BAMs, for a new venture. Each model represents the perspective of a different stakeholder, and they do not align. What would you suggest to Pfizer as the best course of action? The best course of action. Now let's look at what answers are available to us. It says A, bring the stakeholders together to reach a consensus. B, ask the owner of the new venture which model they prefer. C, select the model that is best. And D, hold a stakeholder vote on which model to use. Okay, so what we can see from this, if we read it once again, you've been asked by Pfizer for advice. She has produced a set of business activity models. So we know that these are models that are used by business analysts or consultants to map out the perspectives of stakeholders on what they think the business does in terms of its activities. So essentially it's just a board or a piece of paper with all the overview actions that the business does. They capture leads, they then speak to the sales consultants then sell them the product. The product team then gets the request to deliver the product. The delivery services then delivers the product to the delivery services then deliver the product to the customer. If the customer has an issue or they need servicing of the product, they then reach out to the customer services team, and so and so and so. So it's mapping out these overview activities that make up the business model. So it's all the activities that make up the high level activities that make up the business. And often the business activity models are used in the beginning of an analysis or a research, a study of the business, to get to grips with an understanding of what the business actually does. So sometimes business analysts are external consultants. They may come into the organization. They need to understand clearly what the business does in terms of its overview processes and activities. Then what they would also use this for is to actually identify the differences in perspectives of how all these different stakeholders or stakeholder groups inside the organization perceive what the business does in terms of its activities and its importance. And then we can then use this to identify problems, in terms of the business's activities and such. And we also have the various categories of what the activities are. They're doing, planning, monitoring activities and such. But we know that we are, in this context, we are looking at various business activity models that have been created from different stakeholders. So we may be in an organization where maybe the managers of the organization have mapped out what they think the organization does, and then the customer services department, they have mapped out how they think the organization does it. All these different perspectives. There may have even been various executives or leaders, senior leaders of the organization, who we want to clarify what they think is the most optimal model for the business to carry out its activities. But more often than not, you'll find that people have got different viewpoints. They think that maybe a particular activity should be done before another one, or maybe a certain activity should be split into two, or should be done right at the end of the process rather than at the beginning, and such. So different people will have different ideas on how the business should run in terms of its activities. So it's a tool used by business analysts to actually come to grips with the understanding and help stakeholders to optimize and develop what they think is the best course of action for the business to operate. But we know from our studies that there's such a thing known as a consensus model, where when there are differences in perspectives, when there is conflict, when all these different business activity models have been created and they're different, what we need to do is we need to bring all these stakeholders together, maybe in a workshop or some form of a meeting, where we can put all these models down on a piece of paper and discuss all the differences to come to a conclusion as to what the best way that the organization should be operating. This is known as the consensus model. So we know that from our business analysis studies that this is the best course of action here. It's there in the first selection, which is A, is to bring the stakeholders together to reach a consensus. It's not B, where we ask the owner of the new venture which model they prefer, because maybe all of the other business activity models that have been created may be optimal versus whoever the owner of the organization is. Maybe that might be the problem, is that the owner might not see that the organization can operate on a different level, and there may be 4 other stakeholders or stakeholder groups, even someone far down in customer services or in sales or product development has actually the best way of how the organization should operate. Everyone's perspective should really be taken into consideration when you're carrying out this type of business analysis work. And this, the third selection here, which says select the model that is best. Now, why should we as business analysts be able to just literally, out of all of these different business activity models from different stakeholder perspectives and groups, just decide that that's the best one? There may be really important features or important bits of information that we can gather from looking at other people's different perspectives. And also, just as a side note, sometimes when there are problems or there are conflicts, that actually presents an opportunity for improvement. It shouldn't be seen as something that is a negative thing. We can actually identify that and address it and look at what's the best way forward. So we'll bring everyone together and decide, this model is great, a part of that model is great, a part of this model is great. Let's join those all together. Everyone agrees that that's the best way forward, and that's the way the business should operate. And there we have a consensus model. Let's just look at the final selection here, which says hold a stakeholder vote on which model to use. And we can see here that this also is not the most optimal thing to do, because there's no discussion. There'll be no feedback and input on these models by bringing people together to reach a consensus. There's no negotiation. Everyone's perspectives will just remain their own perspectives, and each vote will just represent what they think is best in terms of their own ideas on the business. It's only by bringing people together to reach a consensus and to look at, why have you put that on that model and why have you put that on that model? Shouldn't we rather do it like this? That's when improvements are made. So that's question 4 now covered. I'll see you in the next question.